Jerry.
Thanks, Carrie.
Hey.
Welcome to Talk Back. If you are staying for Talk Back, we'd love for you to grab your seat. If you are heading out, you can continue your conversations outside. It's a beautiful day today, and so we hope that you can journey to the porch to continue speaking with one another. If you have not filled out a question, I will come around with the mic at the end for a few brief questions that you might have, or anything that strikes your attention during our time together today.
Hey, Mia.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, everybody.
Oh, yes, come on up.
I think we can, yes. Hey, Morris.
Welcome to Talk Back. We want to honor your time. This is thank you. So many coming in. Thank you all for filling out your cards. I hope that was helpful for you to get your thoughts out. Ben, how are you feeling post your sermon?
I'm good.
You're feeling good?
Yeah, good to see everybody here. Had a couple of good conversations with folks as they were coming out today, and it feels really good to be back in person. I'm tired of talking to myself. So thank you all for coming and being here in person. So it's really good to see you all and be with you here.
Yes. So we're going to get started. The way this new Talk Back format is going for the moment is that you submit your questions, and then I'll help curate the conversation. And then at the end, if there are any other short questions, I will come around with the mic with my mask on, and we can hear your voice from there. So Ben, the first question I have from Nikki is, what unexpected blessing did you personally experience during the pandemic? What has been the hardest part for you? And I'm going to frame that in shaping the context of your sermon, talking about mental health and talking about the challenges that all of us experience. What has been a blessing in this unprecedented time?
Well, for me personally, what's been hard, I'll start with what's hard. I think what was hard for me as an extrovert and as a person who loves people and feeds off the energy of other people, being unable to be with people in the pandemic was a real drain. It was actually much harder for me. I'm an extrovert. I know introverts get their energy other places, but for me, my energy comes from people, and I was not able to be around people. We were not even gathering as a staff for 14 months. We were not coming together as a congregation. So it made it much more challenging for me to do ministry, because ministry for me has been always about engaging with people and being around people and getting that energy from people. So that energy wasn't there. So I had to find other ways and other strategies to deal with the pain of loss. I really think it's important to consider it a grief of losing the ability to be with each other in person. And we need to own that as a grief and name that as a grief. And now even that we're back together doesn't mean that we've overcome all the grief that we experienced from that period of time. But there was a grief for me of not being able to be with people in that period of time. So what did I do with my pain? Well, for me, that manifested as anxiety. So when I'm not able to be around people and I'm just in the house all the time or whatever it was, especially early in the pandemic, anxiety begins to start to well up. You start just feeling like the overwhelming sense of you got to go do something. So I began doing a lot more exercising. I inspired by some of our members who I know get up at like 5 a.m. and go exercise at the Y. So I started trying to, I was joking that I was running away from my anxiety, literally running. And that exercise began to help to find a center. I continue to do meditation group that we have here at the church, where we have a week online. It moved online. We still have a pretty solid group of 15 to 20 people who come online and meditate. And that meditation was very centering for me. So those were some ways that I coped with that, the pain of anxiety that came up. I guess the blessing for me is that I found, even in the midst of a pandemic, I did find relationship. Some of you may know already that I'm dating, so that's exciting. But I think finding love in the midst of a pandemic was an unexpected blessing. I didn't think that was going to happen. I would have never imagined that. And also to have a period of time in the pandemic where my life was not in the fishbowl, in the spotlight, where I could nurture a relationship in private. That was also a great gift. pastors don't always have that gift. So anyway, we could talk a lot about that.
Yes. Okay, we have another question here. It says, a couple of us have been talking about pain and how do you sit with people's pain, and not just sit with it, but how do you respond? And so can you talk a little bit about our role as the church and as community? How do we sit with and respond to others' pain and suffering, particularly as it relates to what you preached on today?
Yeah. Actually, the church is not great at this. No church is. I'm not saying ours particularly. Church is not great about pain. There's a study that was done of large evangelical megachurches and the kind of music that's sung on Sunday mornings. And most of the songs, of contemporary Christian music are all praise songs. And then they studied the amount of the songs that were praise compared to how many of the psalms are about praise. And only half the psalms are praise psalms. The other half are laments. And the church doesn't do a great job with lament. Lots of people just want to be happy all the time. They don't want to sit with pain. They don't want to sit with suffering. They don't want to acknowledge the pain of either individual people's experience or the pain of the world and what's happening in the world. I think our church does a better job with lament than some other churches do. Because of the way we practice the liturgical seasons and lean into seasons of penitence and seasons of contemplation. So I think that's I'll just start there with the broad frame of reference that church in America doesn't really deal. It's just all the power of positive thinking. Be happy all the time. Be positive all the time. Don't be negative. Almost all of that is escapism. Most people are suffering. There's a lot of pain in the world, and we've got to deal with it. We can't run from it. We can't deny it. So that's the first thing, is to acknowledge the pain that's in the world. I think that's both a collective responsibility and an individual responsibility. So where this gets tricky is that if an individual is not able to share their pain with others, then we're not able to be community fully, the profound community that we want to be, that we're trying to be. So the first step is there's a lot of bravery needed by people who are in pain to be willing to actually share their pain. But again, it's like chicken and the egg, because if there's not a community where people feel that they can bring their pain and the community knows what to do with it, they're never going to be honest. If all we're doing is singing happy, clappy praise songs all the time, nobody's going to think that pain is welcome. If all we're doing is talking about positive stuff all the time, nobody's going to think pain is welcome. So we have to create a welcome space for pain. And sometimes we do better at that, and sometimes we don't. I think that's the first thing, because the welcome space for pain and practices of sharing pain will then allow other people, like Naomi Osaka did, as I mentioned in the sermon, allow people to feel permission that regardless of their age or their athletic prowess or how much money they have, all of us are going through pain in life, and we can share it, and part of the work is to share it. And that's the first step, is on the church's side is to create a community where pain is welcome, and on the individual side is to be brave enough to share it. Without either of those, no program, no practice, no worship service is ever going to make a damn bit of difference in anybody's life. Because if there's not that community, no one's going to feel like they can share it. And even if there is a community, if people don't share it, you won't know who's actually in pain and what kind of pain they're suffering, so you won't know how to sit with them and be with them. I mean, I think small groups are a really great way to get to know where people are at in their pain. It's hard to do that in a large group. So small groups, I think friendships in church that are formed here can be different kinds of friendships than we have with maybe our coworkers or with our neighbors or even with our family, because there may be a truth that we can speak to each other when we have friends through the church that we can't talk about with our family because it's not safe or something like that. So I think going out to dinner with folks in the church, creating friendships with other church members, sharing, being willing to share your pain with each other, and I think that's really critical and key.
Yes, thank you. One of the things that we often hear is that you should transform your pain into passion. You should transform your pain into something productive. And so one of the questions we have here is, should your pain be transferred into passion? what should you do with it, and how should you be with it? And what is this push toward productivity, even in this lamentation that we experience?
That's a hard one because that's a reflection. That question is a reflection of our society, and it's also that's a fine line because some of that language of transform your pain, turn your pain into something else, is the language of a consumer-driven culture of productivity. Is that your pain is the key to your financial well-being. If you could just figure out what to do with your pain and anxiety, then you're going to make a lot of money and be a productive member of society. We don't want to acknowledge that sometimes there is no positive outcome of pain except it's just the pain. There's moving through it. There's finding new life after it. There's healing it. But sometimes there's not a productive kind of like I became a better person because of my pain, or I became stronger, or that's not necessarily always the case, nor should we require that. I think it's fine if people are at a place where they are taking the pain in their life and using and trying to transform it into making themselves a better person, or more empathetic, or more caring, or stronger, or more resilient. But sometimes that's not possible, and we just need to acknowledge that that's not possible with all forms of pain. Some pain just has no productive option from it. It's not for your growth. It's just pain. But we still have to lean into it. So I think what Chodron says is to lean into your pain, acknowledge it's there, and actually feel it. For me, I'll just speak personally, whenever pain happens in my life, I want to hit the fast forward button and fast forward through the pain, right? And I'm reminded, I've been using this analogy a lot lately. There's a movie with Adam Sandler. It's a terrible movie, but it's got a really powerful metaphor in it. I think it's called Click. Anyway, he's got a remote control that he gets from some wizard, and it allows him to fast forward through all the bad parts of his life. Actually, he can fast forward through good or bad. But he begins to fast forward through all the stuff he doesn't like. And suddenly he wakes up as a very, very old person and has no relationships. All of his people have left him, and he's alone and miserable. Why? Because he's just pretended that that he could just erase the pain, that the pain was not important to other people, and that he should just skip through it and fast forward through it. And therefore, he never learned anything from it. He never leaned into it. He never became the person he needed to be in those relationships with others because of what the pain was. And so he ends up miserable. So in the end, he goes back and tries to live a new life. It's it's a wonderful life sort of moment. But I think for me, I want to fast forward through the pain. And so I always have to caution myself when the pain comes, for whatever it is, depression, anxiety, etc., that you feel, experience in your life, loss, grief, to sit with it and actually feel it. So one of the tricks, just a life hack, one of the tricks I used years ago to figure out how to do that was whenever I would, after I got separated and was having a custody relationship with Lucy was like very, very young. And I was having Lucy for the weekends, and then I would have to drop her off with her mother, knowing I would not see her again for a period of time. It's a very painful experience for a young father, right? So, but I would get in the car, and I would want to immediately fast forward through the pain and not feel it. And so I would turn on a talk show or some crazy theological podcast and just, escape, something to escape. But what I learned to do was to turn on a really, really sad song, like a terrifyingly sad song, and just sit there and cry as I drove after I dropped her off. And by doing that, I actually sat with the pain long enough for the cathartic work of the pain to happen in me that needed to happen. That the emotions that I needed to have took place. What often happens when you don't feel it is you go home and then you lash out at your dog. Or I'll be mean to Joe. It's not nice. I shouldn't do that. Something will come out. And it's projection because I haven't dealt with the pain that I'm feeling. And so I spend the time with the song. The song, it was a crazy song. It was by this band called the Drive-By Truckers, and the name of the song was Goddamn Lonely Love. So you can see how Depressing it was. It's actually quite depressing song. But a perfect song for feeling pain. Perfect.
We'll put that in worship someday. And I think that the church is responsible for a lot of this, right? This idea that you have to suffer in order to get to some greater moment, the glory that is going to be revealed. Romans 8. Thank you. Romans 8, right?
Right.
And so we get used to suffering, and we think that our pain is supposed to lead us to somewhere glorified, but we have to do the work in order to get to that place. Yeah.
Well, there's this myth of redemptive suffering. Not all suffering is redemptive. And Christians have perpetuated the myth of redemptive suffering for generations, imagining that that whatever you're suffering is somehow a part of your redemption story. And that makes the cross into just like a little bit of, like it's just a detour on the way to glory. That's not how I see the cross. It's not a detour on the way to glory, right? So I think we have to be careful not to try to imagine that all pain and suffering is going to be redeemed. Some of it is just, it is just what it is, pain and suffering, part of the human experience.
Yes. Related, we have a question from Devin, who says, because we live in and this is a long question, so bear with me.
No surprise there. No surprise that it's
because long. We live in a capitalist society where white supremacy is pervasive, it feels expected, especially for marginalized communities, to return to normal quickly. Many Americans worry that if we share our pain, it will make people view us as incapable of doing our jobs or too much of a liability because of the resources and accommodations we might require. I've heard and experienced these things firsthand. Question. I'm curious if you could speak to the impact of hustle culture and capitalist culture on our mental health and how we can go about navigating or even changing these systems.
Whew, my goodness, Devin. I love that question because some of y'all were wondering why I preach the way I do, but it's because Devin is in the audience, Great question, Devin. So one of the things that we have not wrestled with enough as people of faith, but also as Americans, is the impact that not capitalism as such, but late-stage neoliberal capitalism of this current moment has had on our individual lives and on our personal lives and on our families. And we're not wrestling with that enough. For instance, some people love to talk about the divorce rate and why are things going so bad with families and why can't anybody stay together? Well, when you don't have weekends anymore, when the hell are people going to spend time with each other? When you don't have time off, when you can't get time off for pregnancy, paternity leave, when you can't get vacation time, when you're working on this grind, most Americans don't have vacation time. Many Americans are essential workers. They don't have health care. They don't have vacation time. They don't have anything. So, and then you're wondering why their family life is in shambles? They don't have time to build their family lives. All of it is connected. The lack of leisure time is connected to the family's disintegration. The lack of leisure time is a result of the late capitalist economic system. All of these things are connected. We have to be able to make the connections. So, to this question that Devin is asking us about our individual lives, one of the things that late capitalist society wants us all to imagine is that our value is determined by what we produce. Our value is determined by what we produce in the world. And that is a lie. That is a flat lie. And I think it's important, particularly as we have a congregation filled with retirees, right? What is the value that a retiree is providing? What is the value that, for instance, people in my family who are on disability and have mental health issues and will never work again? What is the value that they're producing? Their value, a value of a human being, is not determined by what we produce in the world. Our value is inherent in our creation. We are valuable regardless of what we ever do. This is why people who will never work a day in their life, maybe who have a mental disability of some kind, are still as valuable as the person who works from the day they're born until the day they die. So we have to begin to overcome this sense of that who people are is determined by what they produce. Their value is not determined that way. Now, the capitalist society wants to do that. That's how we value everything, determine how much it produces. So we have to reframe that when it comes to human beings, and particularly with regard to mental health. There are sociologists, I'm not going to get them all off the top of my head right now, who have often tied the economic system of a society to the primary maladies and disorders that the people experience. So, for instance, in certain times throughout human history, depending upon how society was ordered, particular mental health aberrations would take place. That the society and mental health are tied together. There is a reason so many people experience anxiety in America, and they don't maybe say in other countries, or depression, or certain other things. And it's not just because Americans are frail, it's because the society is shaping and forming people in a particular way, impacting our mental health in a particular way. So this is what I was trying to say in the sermon when I said it's not about you. You're not the problem. You're not the problem, you know? You didn't do this to yourself. You didn't wake up and decide you wanted to be anxious or depressed. You know, nobody does. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to have a psychotic break today. Also, nobody causes their own mental health stuff. That's really rare for someone to say, like, I'm going to do a bunch of, unhealthy behaviors and lead myself into mental health. That's not how it works. It's part of the world. Sometimes it's unexplainable, and other times it's very obviously a result of the way that society is bearing down on particular human bodies at a time in history. So when you step out and you say, I need to take a mental health day, or you need to take a break from mental health, because society values you based on your production, it's going to want you to come back to work as fast as possible. It's going to want to get you back into the economic productivity chain, consumption and production. And if you don't, then they're going to begin to try to value you differently. So the trick is to make sure you understand a sense of your own value. We can't control the way that our employers or businesses, organizations, institutions, universities value the human person. All we can do is make sure we know that we have our dignity and our value is never determined by anyone else. It is not determined by an organization. It is not determined by what we do for a living. It's not dependent upon what we produce or how much money we have. It is determined by God. It's just we are blessed, beautiful, beloved creatures who have inherent value and dignity just because we exist, period. End of sentence. And then we can try to figure out what does it mean what is the life-giving, human, authentic way for me to take care of myself and to find a way to contribute or to live in this particular world as it is now. And that is a discernment we all have to go through. We have to think about, obviously, just like any calling, what's my role in this particular society at this point in time in history? But I think it's really important that we make sure that our value is not tied to the way that our employers or anybody else imagines it related to productivity. We have to cut that off. And obviously, we have to do work as a church and as people who care about justice in the world to continue to proclaim and witness prophetically to our society that you are valuing humans wrong. The way you value people is wrong. And that's part of our work as well. I don't know if that answers Devin's brilliant question, but I did what I could.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to say hello to the people who are watching online. We do have a few questions and comments here about the format of Talkback, and one person suggests that it might be a great exercise. You were talking about small groups and how you can share in small groups, and it might be a great idea to have a talk back format that's actually a small group. And so that's an idea that I would love to take into the fall. While we're trying to still have our hybrid experience, our seating here is so that the people online can see and hear us and participate as well as you in person. But I am totally down within the fall having some sort of class or group that gathers after the service every Sunday to just gather somewhere and talk through and to build community so that we can share in pain and that we can lament together and grow together. So I received that feedback and comment wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
We have a question from Morris that talks about sin. The text states that whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never be forgiven. Can all sins be forgiven? What is eternal sin? And you can shape this in the context of your sermon if you like.
Well, as you might have noticed, I'd avoided that entirely because it's so complicated. Okay, so I have regularly been asked, I think Tim Martin was the last person who asked me this, to explain what Jesus means by an unforgivable sin. All right, I don't know the answer, except we have one text where he says it, and it's this one. And he says it in relationship to what's happening to him. So we need to keep the context in mind. But in this context, he is basically saying that his family, but most importantly the scribes from Jerusalem who've come down, are blaspheming against the Holy Spirit because they are saying that he has an unclean spirit. So what he is saying is they're saying that they're denying the work of the Spirit in healing and liberation. They're saying that that's not the work of God, that's the work of the devil. So they are saying that what Jesus is saying is when you say that what God is doing in the world is actually the work of Satan, that's blaspheming against the Holy Spirit. Now, that doesn't necessarily answer your question because you're all like thinking to yourself, maybe I did that. And maybe we have. But I think if we go around telling people who are working in the world for what we believe God is in the world for, love, healing, justice, liberation. If we go around telling those people who are working for that, you are Satan, and demonizing them for the work that they're doing to try to build a better world, we are standing against the work of the Spirit in the world, according to Jesus in this text. And that's what the scribes were doing. And Jesus is considering that to be unpardonable. Now, sin is not a one-time activity. So this is where the hope comes in. Sin is not a one-time thing. You slap somebody, you sin, and you go home, and you're fine, after you tell God about it. Sin is an ongoing practice, something we live into because we are more accustomed to the ways of a world that feeds our own self-interest than cares about everybody's common good. And so I think a person who continues to perpetually call anything in the world that is good, that is loving, that is for justice, that is for healing and liberation, if somebody is always calling that the work of the devil constantly, then to me that seems like it's what Jesus is saying. We can all find ourselves from time to time standing in opposition to the work of the Spirit in the world. Everyone can find themselves. But perpetuating in that forever, consistently, is what Jesus is saying. The scribes and Pharisees, they're not coming back around. That's what he's kind of saying in this passage. They've decided they're going to kill him. He knows this. They decided they're going to kill him. Not because he needed to die, necessarily, right? This is not about he did something wrong, therefore there's some kind of punishment that society needs to be met out. No, they were trying to kill him because he's upending a social order that they benefit from. So they have decided they're going to kill him. He knows this. They've said it. So he's saying, no, you've decided. That's to him at that point, he's like, this is unpardonable. You're going to kill somebody who's just out here trying to heal people? That's unpardonable. So that's, I think, what's going on in that text at that time.
Thank you. We have a few more moments left, so I'm going to go through these questions quickly and then come around the room if there's any short questions or comments. Can the gospel or church help believers of QAnon? Does QAnon indicate a failure of material mental health services? I think that's what that says.
Ooh, my goodness. Yes, obviously. I mean, our whole society has taken away from mental health. So when, I actually was just talking to somebody about this, about this question around defunding the police or police abolition, which is a very hot conversation among abolitionists right now and social justice folks. The problem is we've asked police to do things that they should not be doing. Police are not meant to be social workers. They are not meant to intervene in domestic disputes. They should not be trying to show up when somebody's having a mental health crisis at their home. Every time someone who is armed and trained to kill shows up in a situation that is supposed to be a situation of maybe mental health or domestic issue, you escalate the situation because they show up with a gun and uniform, and because of the long history of police malpractice in American society. So we have to think about the fact that all public services in this neoliberal economy, back to Devin's point, have been stripped away. The safety net has been taken. All social services have been defunded. Mental health has been defunded. The only public thing we're going to defund anymore is the police. That's the only thing getting funding. So when people say defund, they really mean reallocate. Reallocate funding back to the social services that will help us need less police intervention. In an economy and an economic system that takes care of people and doesn't let them fall through the cracks. And so what does that have to do with QAnon? I could get on a soapbox there. Okay, when you take away mental health services, you make society less safe because you enable more conspiracies to be taking place from those who really need time away to decompress, right? Plus, it was the pandemic. I think that and its relationship to QAnon really did have an impact because everybody's stuck at home, they're on the internet, they're feeding themselves with this stuff on the internet, and it's just, so I think it's an online problem of internet misinformation, it's a pandemic problem, it's a lack of mental health services problem. The last thing that I would say explains QAnon is the church. The church in America has lied to itself and to its people for so long, they no longer know the difference between the truth and a lie. So we can blame many church leaders and many church people for deciding that somehow we're going to just continue to perpetuate lies and that it's never going to have an impact on people. If you lie to yourself for so long, you no longer know the difference between a truth and a lie. This is what it means to be caught in a web of lies. This is why we have people struggling to deal with the reality of slavery, the reality of white supremacy, what happened in Tulsa. We knew these things. We knew they happened. They were not hidden. We knew them. We knew they happened. We just could not face them. So we lied to ourselves because we couldn't face the truth. And the church has been the major proponent of that, which is why in my sermon I said, it's not supposed to be the happiest place in town. It's supposed to be the most honest. We have to be honest in church. It's truth will set us free. That's what Jesus said, right? So I think that's our job.
All right, we have 5 minutes. Is there anybody that didn't get a chance to write a question? I have time for 2 that wants me to come meet them to ask their question. All righty then. Well, this is the last question, and it's kind of related to reflecting back on the time in the pandemic, Ben. So you can answer any of these. The pros and cons of online attendance, implications long-term for in-person attendance, how were interpersonal relationships maintained, financial support, volunteerism. So that's how that question was asked. I'm going to give you some time to just reflect on the past 15 months, if you will, to close us out today for Talk Back.
Great question. We're still learning what the impact of all that is, as are all churches in America. All churches in America are struggling right now to imagine what the future of church holds. Let's remember, Before the pandemic, the church in America was declining at a rate it has never been declining ever before. Over 4,000 churches were closing every year. The rapid decline in in-person attendance was overwhelming, which was also related to a decline in volunteerism, right? People were just not participating in social organizations the way they once were, and church was getting hit harder than anybody else. So that's the context that we go into the pandemic with. We go in with that context. But in the pandemic, for us, this church, we were able, with the financial resources of our members and the ingenuity of our staff, to pivot to be able to provide a stronger online service. And that took a lot of work. When the pandemic hit, we didn't have a single computer in the church office with a microphone or a camera. And we were broadcasting our service in 1985 VHS quality. And we had no we had a half-time paid sound engineer. Now, since then, we've hired Wes and Joe and Hannah, and we have equipment that we invested in. The Strategic Planning Council invested in over $100,000 of equipment from the endowment. You could see the cameras on the side, the lighting here and here, to improve the quality of the visual experience online. We didn't start even using that until May. This is brand new that we're doing that now. And the reason we invested in that is because we learned through our study that when we came out of the pandemic, we had to continue to maintain as high a quality video as we were doing in the pandemic with different equipment, because otherwise people would drop off who were watching online and who were never going to come back in person. A lot of churches are expecting that a good 20% of people who were coming in person before the pandemic are never coming back to church ever, except on Christmas and Easter, because they enjoy the experience of watching at home, just as they do for everything else in their lives. Netflix, HBO Max. Think about the problem, what's going on with movie theaters right now. You can rent, or if you have an HBO Max subscription, just not even rent, just pay your subscription, and get a movie before it even comes into a theater now, in your home. Stream it right before, which has cut down the distance between production and consumption to like a day. When it's done, now it's here. It's instant. And if people are not going to go back to movie theaters, why are they going to come back to the church? I think we do need to reckon with the fact there's some people who are just not coming. They're not coming back. But there will always be a place for in-person live worship. So our goal now, as we've come out of the pandemic, is to make sure that the in-person experience and the live and the online experience are both as high a quality as we can create. Now, I will say, for those of you who've come back, there's nothing like listening to live music. You can't do that online. You cannot replicate that. Hearing the choir right here, nothing like it. I mean, it's just a totally different experience. Hearing the jazz band on Pentecost, nothing like it live. You won't be. Now, me preaching, I don't know. I mean, some things it might be better online. I don't know. You can pause me, you can fast forward me. If you get bored, you can go get a cup of coffee. You can multitask. So I don't know what people will want going forward. But I do think we have to be prepared that our church is now is a hybrid church. It was hybrid before. Remember, we had folks at Southminster who never came here. It was always hybrid. So let's not say it's new. We're just more hybrid now. We got more people watching on. Through the whole summer, we'll have more people watching online than will be in person for the whole summer. And that's a reality we have to come to grips with. Now, the cool thing is, for us, thank God, is while more churches died in the pandemic than died beforehand, thousands and thousands have died, and even more are dying faster than they ever have, and we don't even really know the results yet. At one point, the numbers were so staggering last May that we stopped counting because it was too ridiculous to imagine how many churches were going to close in the pandemic. So we just stopped because it was too overwhelming. But we are not in jeopardy of that. Actually, if you look at the budget year over year, our members, you all, gave more money in the pandemic than the year before. Now, we also receive PPP funding and other funding, to help us get through difficult things with Cornwell and through the week and other things. But the membership giving stayed strong even though we were online that whole time, which to me is a testimony to our members' dedication and commitment to this church. And also I hope that it has something to do with how cautious we were and careful and serious we took COVID and the plans that we made and the way in which we went about. We're still having people call us and ask us for copies of our plans that we created to use in their own church settings because we took such care in putting them together. So I feel really good about where we are. I mean, I wish we were all back in person. I wish the pandemic had never happened. Of course, I wish all those things. But we are in a much better situation than a lot of churches, including a lot of churches in our neighborhood. I'm not talking about just little small churches out in the country that are dying. A lot of people are getting hit hard and having to make really hard decisions. We got to keep our entire staff whole. Think about that. We did not lay off a single church staff member. None of the other churches in the neighborhood can say that. That is an important thing. It shows who we are, our character, what we care about, what we prioritize is people. And really, I have to thank you all for that, because without you, we couldn't have done that. So, did I get out? What else is there?
That was that question.
Okay. That was
Thank
good.
you all for coming
Thank
to
you
Talk
all so
Back.
much. Yeah.
We will see you next week with Bill Leonard. So
Bill
please
Leonard.
stay because that will be a treat.